were summoned from the hillside, they were called in from the glen, and the country found them ready at the stirring call for men. Let no tears add to their hardships as the soldiers march along, and although your hearts are breaking, make them sing this cheery song. Keep the home fires burning while your hearts are yearning. Though your lads are far away, they dream of home. There's a silver lining 'neath the dark cloud shining. Turn the lining inside out till the boys come home.
1945 was a year of endings and beginnings. All kinds of memories remain: adventure, comradeship, sacrifice, overseas encounters that led to lasting bonds, the lessons learned of life and death, the years of youth claimed by battle, distance, danger, pride of service. The enduring memory of the Dutch was the joy of liberation and the role played by Canadians in rescuing their land and their people from the nightmare of war. In late 1944, the Germans flooded these lowlands. The 3rd Division, nicknamed the Water Rats, doggedly set about winning back the homeland of a starving people. The Green Troops, who landed on the shores of France a half year before, had now become an army. In Italy, almost 70,000 soldiers were still fighting a winter campaign. Until February 1945, when the order came, they were needed elsewhere.
When we left Italy, it was a shattering experience. We'd lived there so long. It only a year, but it seemed like 100 years. We lived there as an exiled army. I think we were more empathetic towards the Italian civilians, and even the Italian army, than we were towards Canada and Canadians at that point. We felt as if we belonged there somehow. Then suddenly we're loaded into ships and taken to Marseille in southern France, and a long convoy up through France, and we're into the big show, as it was then called. It was not the same. It was a different war. There were all these soldiers around us wearing spick and span uniforms with marvelous equipment, new trucks, new tanks, new guns, all the ammunition they could fire. We took part in the end of war, as we called it, the last few months, with as much vigor, I guess, as we had in Italy, but with a different feeling. We didn't feel we belonged. 1st Canadian Division never felt they belonged to 1st Canadian Army. We thought of ourselves as 8th Army, because that's where we'd done the worst of our fighting.
For the Canadian divisions, now together in the Netherlands, their progress was still occasionally bogged down, but not their sense of humor. By March of 1945, the battle took Canadians for the first time into Germany itself, as they were fighting to open a corridor to the Rhine. In the 6th year of the war, the Nazi power structure was starting to crumble. Everyone began to feel they'd had enough.
After the Hochwald Force and Reichswald Force, not only the fighting tough, but the mud and being in the force. And we cleared all the towns of Cleve and Xanten and there. And in one of these towns, I saw this German lady standing in the doorway with her belongings. And it just reminded me of so many French and other Belgians and Dutch that I'd seen before. And so I photographed her. Say that in war, there's no one is secure, no one's safe. By then I was a veteran, and I knew the whole thing was unfair to everybody. They didn't want a war either.
Now the Canadians came not as long-awaited liberators, but as the conquerors of each exhausted, defeated community. Civilians might be ready to give up, but not the German soldiers.
It was getting dirty war because we were into Germany now. And dirty not only in mud, but in actions. They were fighting for survival now. And there was no quarter given or asked.
General Harry Crerar now led the largest force ever under Canadian command. 450,000 British and Canadian troops. They were amassed for the biggest offensive since D-Day, an assault across the Rhine. There would be 1,000 aircraft, some to tow the gliders carrying troops to the far side of the river.
There were 20 men that boarded that aircraft with my stick. Everybody is talking, some people telling jokes. There's one or two that are dozing or feigning sleep, but finally, with the door taken off the aircraft as we were approaching the Rhine, we stood up and moved right tight to one another. And I remember looking down on the Rhine and thinking, my God, this is a lake, because I had no idea the depth, the width, the size of the Rhine River.
That was an amazing operation. We had to cross this Rhine, and the only way to do it was in buffaloes, which are armored amphibious vehicles. Before we took off down the bank and into the water and over and up the other side, overhead, large squadrons of bombers went ahead first, and there was quite a bit of noise beyond beyond the ridge where they were dropping their bombs, and then towed by other planes, and they rode up Plinta Fields, and it was enormous. The sky was absolutely full of those gliders. They were like vast birds, and the troops dropping like little white dandelions in the distance. And then we were called, and our whole operation got underway as if we'd been sort of sucked in tow by all this. It was probably the most dramatic single operation I was in. It's not anything I would like to repeat today, but it was exciting at that time.
March 23. The last Great Barrier had been crossed, and just about all of Canada's overseas army was now on the move.
About 2 weeks before VE Day, we had obviously broken through the last remnants of the German army. It suddenly became evident to us riding the tanks that we were passing German battalions and obviously divisions with heavy weapons and artillery collapsed beside the roads, just in the fields. It did occur to me on this mad dash, leaving all these fully armed battalions and probably divisions behind us, that if they had ever decided to get up and fight again, we'd be cut off away out in left field.
By April, more and more of the German forces were being taken prisoner. Even then, the teenage soldiers of the Hitler Youth would not admit defeat.
They were fanatical, you know, the young Germans who came into us at the last. There were youngsters just out of high school, and some who hadn't left high school yet, who had been taken prisoner and were brought in to us, and we tended them and looked after their wounds and everything. But they were absolutely fanatical and proud of the fact that they have been able to shoot people. And they made no bones about it. It was sad.
And it was there, too, that in that hospital that I first heard Lily Marlene. I had never heard it. And there was a group of German prisoners always outside the operating room, and they carried the patients on stretchers to X-ray and to the wards and to operating room and so on. And they were sitting making dressings at this table and singing beautifully Lily Marlene. And that was the first time I'd ever heard that lovely song.
From some points of view, war is utterly folly. But you can't afford to feel that war is foolish, I think, at the time that you're involved in it. As a matter of fact, you don't evaluate and you don't interpret war when you're in war. You know, it's a very strange thing about troops in action. Here they are, all of them at one level or another, I suppose convinced in their own minds that they're doomed men, marked men, no way out. And you would think that that would make for a very mournful or doleful bunch of people, but you know, it doesn't. For some strange reason, it makes people who are a very lively and a very loving and a very entertaining group of people to be with. It makes them concerned about each other, how you're feeling, what you're doing, and how the battalion is going. And in other words, a kind of a band of brothers in some respects. And I even had a man. He was a black, and he was tall and sort of erect and well-built and a smiling man. And he had a beautiful voice, a baritone voice. He was a fine sounding man, a good singer. He had a guitar. And in the evenings, he used to take his guitar and go from section to section, this is in the front lines, and try to sing songs and really sing grown men to sleep. He was like a guardian angel. I don't think that experience is ever understood in peacetime.
I was with the North Shore, who were a Catholic regiment, a lot of French, and I was Jewish. They knew I was Jewish, but there was never anything but you were a soldier together, you were a Canadian together. There was never anything that you're French or you're some other religion. Nobody ever thought of that, because when you're in danger together, you look after your buddy because you need his protection also.
Well, we're all one. There was no prejudice, no hatred, no nothing. Well, you had no alternative. You had to work together.
On the 4th of May, the fighting was over. Canadian and German engineers worked together to set up a special communications network to the German High Command.
After nearly 6 years of bitter, our own game of war gives up the struggle. A Group Advance Headquarters, Field Marshal Montgomery accepts the unconditional surrender of those enemy formations opposing his forces.
This to include all naval ships in these areas. These forces to lay down their arms and to surrender unconditionally.
The day of ambition's fulfillment has arrived for the great tactician Field Marshal Montgomery and his comrades in arms. The triumphal note, which was first sounded on the sands of North Africa, has swelled to a mighty crescendo of victory, resounding around the world.
Now I will sign the instrument on behalf of the Supreme Allied Commander, General Eisenhower.
An Allied victory in Europe, with the terms of surrender laid down and signed. But the ceasefire left millions of people who would need help for some time to come. Only a few weeks earlier, the RCAF joined in an airlift of emergency food supplies to the starving civilians in the Western Netherlands. 12,000 tons of rations. As welcome as peace, it's years to heal all the wounds suffered by occupied Europe. Some were still being inflicted, even after the German surrender of liberation, with armed enemy soldiers still around.
I really was, you know, it was too much, it was overwhelming. And we thought, God, it's all going to be over. And it's a good thing in a way that I didn't, because there was still Gestapo and they were in shooting going on, and still some people got killed by that.
It left 900 that was supposed to be over. The 8th of May, 1945 was declared VE Day, Victory in Europe.
On the day, on the morning of VE Day, we got some kind of a message saying the war is over and all German submarines have been ordered to surface and fly a black flag. Then, of course, as the morning wore on and people were celebrating, we went up with a fairly inebriated crew till the captain called me up and said, Reed, I want you to fire a 21-gun salute to King Haakon, Norway. Yes, sir. So off we went, fired the 21 rounds. But an hour later, he called me up and he says, well, because we have a passenger on board that's British, and you're a really British, Canadian, you should go and fire a salute to King George. So off we went, fired another 21 rounds. All went well and good until we landed in New York, and as usual, these merchant ships were met by somebody from the Royal Navy, normally a Marine Color Sergeant, who were almost as if they were born to despise any other human being. And this Color Sergeant came aboard my ship, and of course I had to do an ammunition count in front of him, show him how many rounds I had. Of course I was missing 42 out of the 46 original that I had. And how do you explain it? Where's your log saying you fired at all those U-boats?
There was jubilation as the gates swung open for 9,000 Canadian prisoners of war. There were no riotous celebrations among Canadian forces in the field. They were glad it was over. Too many comrades had been killed, 1,400 since crossing the Rhine. And they were battle-weary, a long way from home.
I was a tired-out person, and in a way kind of indifferent to my circumstances. I remember exchanging the occasional war story with one another. I got very, very bored with that very quickly. What I found was every war story was somehow or other being told to outperform the other person's or outcompete the other person in interest or strangeness. I didn't want to play that game particularly because to me it was kind of too painful to remember because there had been too many people that I knew and had felt responsible for that had never come back from that war.
Close to 45,000 Canadians never came back from the Second World War.
I think I grew up a bit. I was still a boy, old boy, but I didn't know what life or death was, or comradeship like that. People give their lives for somebody, and I just admired them. I admired the enemy too. I think anybody that goes through that is pretty good.
There was a very different atmosphere in the capitals of the Allied world. In England, Londoners, like so many in Canada, began celebrating a day early.
It was a very joyous, very, very joyous moment. It was like a carnival atmosphere. There was no more buzz bombs coming over. There was celebration. It was just joyous. I can't describe it. I mean, everybody, lights were on, and everybody was jumping around and hugging each other and jumping on each other, especially a man in uniform. I mean, the British people were very dedicated to the personnel in uniform, but they really showed their enthusiasm.
It was like New Year's Eve on the 8th of May. They all found their own ways of demonstrating their joy. In Ottawa, the bells in the Peace Tower confirmed the glad news. While most provincial governments made the very Canadian announcement that on VE Day, liquor stores would be closed. There was a victory parade in Montreal, but everywhere there were some memories too sad to be overcome.
Well, the celebration for VE Day was in Montreal. I was in Montreal, and there were hundreds of people going absolutely crazy, but I didn't feel that way at all. I just walked around with a long face. I lost some very, very good friends, and here was all these kids and everybody jumping out of cars and screaming and shouting, and I didn't feel like doing that at all. I just sort of stood back and observed it.
The word of the day, however spelled, meant victory, but a victory not yet total. Another war was still being waged, the war with Japan in the Pacific, where only a few Canadians had been involved.
In May 1945, on VE Day, we perhaps at the end of the day had time for a drink, and that was about it. But it certainly wasn't a big occurrence for us because of our location.
Canadian forces in the Pacific included one special unit.
On parade are a group of Chinese Canadians, specially trained for secret work behind Jap lines. They are interviewed by the Canadian Army newsreel.
Now, just exactly what's this flash stand for?
Well, that's the SEAC flash, the Southeast Asia Command. It's under Lord Louis Mountbatten.
At least you all speak Chinese.
Why, definitely.
What the dickens does that mean?
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Bing Lee remembers what it used to be like to be a Chinese Canadian.
One year was a federal election. They called all the name, and then you go and put on your voting. They end up with a group of about 30 some odd Chinese still standing there. He said, "We can't find you guys' name." Officer come up. "No, we can't find it." So finally one of the boys speak up. "We don't have no voting." "You sure now?" He said, "Yep, we don't have no voting rights." He said, "By God," he said, "I'm going to find out from Ottawa." I think he did. The next day, he come around and, "Sorry, boys."
Even though we're as a third-class citizen, or whatever you call it, that we're not even recognized as a Canadian at that time during the war. To show that I'm patriotic, in order to do so, that I thought it would be best to go out there and show what you can do.
They could do what most Canadians could not. They could infiltrate Japanese-held territory and help organize local resistance. The Chinese-Canadian soldiers were flown to strategic points in Southeast Asia and parachuted in. The Japanese considered them spies. Capture usually meant execution by decapitation. When they weren't engaged in open battle with pockets of the enemy, they were making night raids on fuel depots.
The biggest fear that you have coming up is just remember one of the major that told us 3M. He says, remember 3M. What 3M stands for now.
I asked him. He said, the monsoon, mosquitoes, and malaria. He says if you can survive these three, then he's pretty well that you'll be okay.
Out at sea, the ships of the Fleet Air Arm were busy launching fighter attacks as Allied air forces stepped up the war with the Japanese.
There was 3 islands, plus Formosa, and our job was to try and keep them neutralized as much as we could. And so it meant attacks early in the morning to try and catch the Japanese aircraft before they could get airborne and get up to Okinawa.
By then, most of Japan's top pilots had been killed. Much of their air force had been destroyed, and they were critically short of fuel. The Japanese, in desperation, had begun using a new weapon, a bomb-laden aircraft with a pilot bent on suicide, the kamikaze.
Fellow killed very early on, who was a Canadian doctor. The Indefatigable was hit by the first kamikaze that hit our force, and as luck would have it, he was looking after the first aid party just inside a door in the island, a kind of a Red Cross center, and that's exactly where this Japanese aircraft hit. But the thing with him that sticks in my memory is what he said. The crews were starting to pull everything apart to rescue these people that had died from this kamikaze. And they said, "Don't spend any time with me because I know that I am dying. Look after the others."
Once the Japanese surrender began, the world discovered what had become of the 2,000 Canadian soldiers sent to defend Hong Kong in 1941. Of the 1,500 who were taken prisoner, 319 had died in Japanese labor camps, and many more were desperately close to death.
We were in a coal mine, and that was extremely exhausting work, and we were so weak. Because don't forget, I was about 110 pounds, maybe varying between 100 to 110 pounds. Everything was gone out of every one of us. And by the way, we had been sent there, and I believe that was the case because the British were there before us. And most of them were they were not with us in the mine. Most of them were died, and the few that were still there, they were just walking skeleton. So at the end, we had no news whatsoever. Sometimes I think death would have been a relief to all of us because we had no hope, absolutely no hope at all whatsoever.
September 2nd, 1945. Aboard USS Missouri in Tokyo Harbor, the Japanese delegation came on board to meet General Douglas MacArthur.
I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
It was now official. World War II was over.
The representative of Canada will now sign.
Canada was one of 50 nations at war with Japan, but most of the war effort had been aimed at Nazi Germany. There were almost 300,000 Canadians to be returned from Europe, many of them wounded. Many had known little but the barracks and the battlefield for years. Years of tremendous change in their own lives and in the lives of those they left at home.
Oh, it was wonderful. He just came up and he just grabbed me and held. He's a very physical person, and he hugged me and kissed me, and it was all right. And within days, I resented this man in my bathroom or this man who wanted to eat meals at a certain time and who thought nothing of buying a bottle of whiskey when I felt that it should be spent on meat and potatoes. It took a while to adjust.
I couldn't believe the lights. I hadn't saw anything lit up for 3.5 years, and it was unbelievable. Fruit in the stores, bananas, oranges. I couldn't eat. I couldn't eat a thing. I'd eat maybe 2 or 3 bits, and I was full. I slept on the floor. I went to bed at night. I couldn't sleep on the bed. I slept on the floor. It was very, very hard to rearrange your life. I lived with my mother-in-law and my wife and 2 sisters, all women in the house. I had slept with men for so long. I had terrible time with the women in the home and myself. You know, it was terrifying.
The big objective was to get the uniform off and get a job. I had gotten married, and I was just terrified. The Navy had been looking after me for 5 years, and I had to get a job and start earning money, and I wanted to become one of the faceless civilians. It left me rather in a bad way. I went in when I was 17, I come out, I'm 22. I don't know how to behave on Civvy Street. I was completely terrified. I didn't know how to talk nicely to girls. I didn't know how to behave myself in mixed company. I certainly didn't know anything about business. It was rather a terrifying experience. I had to learn a whole new set of rules and a whole new way of living very quickly because I had responsibilities.
They're a great bunch, them veterans. We're proud. We're all thankful to going through the experience. We all think that we come back alive, and we're sorry about some of our people dying over there, and cemetery after cemetery of our people over there. And then we come back here, and we had visions. We were looking into the spirituality and visions to try to cope with life and help our children.
When I first came home, I was really in a dark period because you were so sad. You couldn't help but be. You can't witness that much destruction of human life without feeling a sense. But somebody said to me not long after I came home, "You had a wonderful trip." And you know, that hurt me more than anything anybody could have said. I wasn't on a trip. I was on a service.
The war brides were another group who would have some adjustments to make. Of the Canadian bachelors who served overseas, 1 out of every 5 got married before they got home. These new brides had some surprises to face.
Well, we were invited to Canada House. They were going to show us the type of clothes you wore here in Canada and the sort of food we cooked. We definitely got the impression that they thought we were a little stupid because, after all, we all knew how to dress, and we were prepared for the fact that it was cold here.
Lecturers talk to the new Canadian citizens on the subject of household science. Notes taken will be valuable later on. Many subjects which will be of use to the wives in their new homes are discussed. Red Cross personnel give demonstrations of cooking the Canadian way. At a fashion show, Red Cross girls also model typical Canadian clothes.
There were 40,000 British, French, and Dutch war brides, with 20,000 new young Canadians. Some of the memories of these newcomers, immigrants.
The trip from England to Canada, it started off bad in refit. Thought we'd ever had. And 2 of the children died of seasickness coming over, and they were just babies. It was the saddest thing to see those babies taken off at Halifax with those fathers there, waiting to see a child they'd never seen.
When I left the ship, it was a tub. We were on the train, and cold at night going through, and the soot, clean them off all the time. And of course there was not much facilities for laundry. We had only rooms where. So the very dirty diapers we threw out of the window. The black porters on the train couldn't do enough for us. They polished our shoes, and they even looked after, when they have a few moments, looked after the babies while we could visit the other girls, you know, give us a break. I offered to, said, no, you need the money. You come in a new country. After the horrid time we had in Holland, I thought this was heaven.
I had never seen anything so barren or so much snow or so much bare country in my whole life, because the flowers were out in England when we left at the end of February, and the grass was green, and here it was white for miles and miles. It was white with no people.
This is your homecoming. You have done your job and done it well. You have dreamed of home-cooked meals, playing with the kids before bedtime, getting back to a job with good pay, and the better life you have been fighting for. Canada's job is to get you re-established, to get you home when X Day comes. Home to a soldier's welcome. And to real home cooking, thick, juicy steaks smothered in onions and mushrooms with French fry. In a way, that's one of the things you have been fighting for.
They were given cash bonuses on discharge. For each month served at home, $7.50. For each overseas, $15. Wherever there were suitable job openings, veterans and war widows were given preference. The Veterans Land Act offered advice on starting a farm. There were loans to set up a small business, to invest, for example, in a fishing boat and in all the tackle that went with it, or to put a down payment on a new family home. $85,000 veterans were given training in vocational schools and joined the still swelling ranks of Canada's industrial workers. 35,000 veterans graduated from university to join the post-war workforce.
Your old job is guaranteed to you by law, as if you had never left the job. But you must apply for reinstatement within 3 months of discharge or 4 months if discharged overseas.
What happened after VA Day, and very shortly afterwards, was that the government contracts were cancelled with the aircraft companies and the munitions people and so on, and people were laid off. And I had rather enjoyed being a fitter. I rather liked that kind of work, and I thought, and it paid fairly well, and I thought, you know, I'd like to see if I could find a job in another factory. But when I applied, I was told that they would hire me only at about half the rate. And I said, well, you know, I was earning 60, 65 in the factory. And they just said, well, you know, lady, the party's over now. We don't hire at those rates anymore.
I think that those girls who married and had children were very, very keen to pass on to their daughters the idea that women could be independent and happy in marriage too. It was a big adjustment for me when I got married, because I had had a very responsible job, and I suddenly found myself in double harness, and career aspirations were something I had to be very careful about.
I suppose you get into a situation such as a war, And it goes on and it goes on. You think, well, that's normal life. It'll never be any better. You'll never be able to go out and buy nylons. You'll never be able to go out and get pretty clothes. And when you're young, those things matter. They probably shouldn't, but they do. But when it was over, you thought, I wonder what normal life is like.
In a modern nylon yarn mill at Kingston, Ontario, production is starting on the precious thread for civilian uses, full-fashioned nylon stockings. If it so happens that you've forgotten what nylons really look like, well, just concentrate on these. At Oshawa, Ontario, the first post-war automobile rolls off the assembly line. The resumption of civilian production marks the completion of a great plan. More than 900,000 man-hours of labor were needed to complete the reconversion program. Now the first fruit of the great task nears completion.
From 1939 to 1945, Canadians had more than doubled their productivity. The incredible mobilization was now ready to start a peacetime boom.
What had happened was that we had been welded together. This amorphous collection of odd little bits and pieces scattered across 3,000, 4,000 miles was hauled together and became unified in with an objective in view, for a point and a purpose. And that mood lasted for 10 years, more or less, after the war. And these were the great 10 years in Canadian history. This was the period when we really thought of ourselves as a nation, and we were enormously proud of ourselves. We had made huge gains in terms of economics. We had the second largest fleet in the world, believe it or not. Our war production plants had outproduced almost anything anywhere else except the United States, and we'd done a pretty good job there too. We were full of confidence. We were absolutely sure that the next decade and the rest of the century belonged to us.
Canada had been one of 50 countries involved in drawing up the Charter of the United Nations. In London in 1946, Canadian soldiers waiting to get home lined up to attend the UN's first public meeting. Canada would soon achieve international stature in peacekeeping and diplomacy. When the founders of one UN agency met, they were welcomed by a man who would win the Nobel Peace Prize, Lester Pearson.
More than 30 of the United Nations from all the continents of the world are gathered here in Quebec to establish the first permanent United Nations organization in the field of food and agriculture.
War unites some, divides others. It weakens. It also strengthens. And it provides enduring memories, especially among those Canadians who sailed back from overseas, gaining a long-awaited glimpse of home.
Coming back to Canada was the most stressful trip one could ever imagine, considering the crossing of the Channel and crossing of the Atlantic 2 years before. The most moving moment was when we approached the coast of Halifax, the coast of Canada. We were heading for Halifax. So we had all gathered on the bridges here and there for the first sight of one's country. But I don't think in all my life I have lived anything more moving than seeing wounded soldiers, amputees, wheelchairs, the silence, as we were all looking through the haze and the fog to grasp the first sight of one's country, Canada. It was moving beyond any description because of the silence. We were all there looking in one direction, the direction in which the ship was heading on both sides. Then suddenly, the siren of the ship, you know, the boom, broke the silence. And then those who were here and there, some on lifeboats, some on bridges here and there, were pointing in the direction of land, you know, and they all started to yell. my country. Because this emotion, in the back of our mind, in our heart, we had made up our mind that perhaps one day we would never see it again. But there it was there.